public will believe, presiding officer. It won't be Craig Hoy, it will be the credit rating agencies, and that is, of course, showing the underlying strength of the Scottish economy and our fiscal management.
Question number 7, Fergus Ewing.
Thank you, presiding officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will request that the Auditor-General conducts an investigation into the ScotWind offshore wind leasing round in light of the finding in the Future Economy Scotland report, Rethinking ScotWind, Maximising Scotland's Offshore Wind Potential, that on a per megawatt basis, a comparable leasing round in England and Wales is projected to raise up to 40 times more than the £755 million raised in one-off fees in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The ScotWind leasing round developed by Crown Estate Scotland was informed by a 2021 review based on expert independent advice to ensure long-term value. It's important to take a holistic view of all the economic value that can be derived from ScotWind, not simply initial option fee payments. For example, ScotWind developers have committed to invest an average of £1.5 billion per project in Scotland, which is expected to deliver jobs and significant economic benefits. I note that the member has written to the Auditor-General asking for an investigation. Scottish Government officials do discuss future audit programmes with Audit Scotland, but ultimately any decision will be for the Auditor-General.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, the Cabinet Secretary has answered the simple question and does seem to take complacency to new Olympian heights. But this report found that we've lost a sum of between 15 and 30 billion pounds. Now, that's between 2 and 4 times the whole of the capital budget of the Scottish Government in 1 year. So, surely, Cabinet Secretary, there has to be an investigation into why there was an auction with a cap. Isn't the purpose of an auction to get the best price? Whose advice was that? And how on earth did they not get advice about comparable value figures which were available just south of the border?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm sure Mr Ewing knows this, but the English and Welsh Round 4 leasing round is not comparable to ScotWind. It comprised fixed-bottom developments in shallower waters, in contrast to the ScotWind programme, which constructed. Reviews, as I've already confirmed, have been based on expert, independent advice. If Mr Ewing has any suggestions about those, I'll be happy to pass them on to the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. At question number 1, I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, President Officer. Taylor was a vulnerable child in local authority care in Glasgow, and she should have been protected, but she was preyed upon by grooming gangs. Last night, she wrote to John Swinney, telling him that she and her friends were plied with alcohol and drugs and sexually abused by at least 10 Pakistani men. Taylor and other victims say there must be a grooming gangs inquiry in Scotland. They say it's the only way to uncover the scale of the abuse, establish why it went unchecked and ensure that it cannot continue. So will John Swinney agree to the inquiry being asked for by Taylor and other victims?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, first of all, I want to confirm to Russell Finlay that I have received the letter from Taylor, and I want to express here to Parliament my admiration for her courage to speak out on such an important and very difficult subject. And I am deeply saddened to hear of any cases of sexual abuse. And as Parliament knows, I have taken significant action during my term in office as a Minister to ensure this issue has been addressed. The Government is undertaking work already through the work of the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, which is looking at previous inquiries, evidence and practices to establish what further actions and recommendations are required. And Police Scotland is actively reviewing current and historical child abuse investigations to determine what issues need to be addressed in any potential inquiry. The Government has remained open to the question of a grooming gangs inquiry, but there is a series of steps being taken to explore these issues at the present moment. And the last point I would make is that it is absolutely vital that where there is any accusation of criminal conduct that is drawn to the attention of the police, and Police Scotland have a duty to address those inquiries and to address those complaints.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you. Taylor's social work files allegedly show that Police Scotland failed to investigate. She said, and I quote, "It made me feel sick to my stomach. It's like they didn't even bother to ask any questions." And that's the bit that gets me the most, because it could have been stopped and it never was. Another grooming gang victim, Fiona Goddard, was trafficked from England to Glasgow and raped by groups of men. She says that as far back as 2014, police in West Yorkshire were, quote, well aware of links to Scotland, but clearly no one bothered to investigate further. Victims don't trust what happened to them will be fully investigated by organisations they believe turned a blind eye or even engaged in cover-up. Has John Swinney spoken with Police Scotland about these new allegations? And does he believe that the actions of the authorities should be independently examined?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, in relation to the case of Taylor, I understand from comments that have been made by Police Scotland that the police have set out, and I'll read to Parliament the comment from Police Scotland. A complaint about the police was received in September 2025. The complainer was spoken to, and we confirmed information had been passed to us. But since no report was made to police in reference to any crime, this complaint did not fit the criteria as a complaint about the police. The complainer was advised she should make a report to police if she had been a victim of a crime. The complainer confirmed she was happy to have the complaint closed with this advice. Now, I put that on the record simply to say that it is absolutely vital in any circumstance where anybody believes they have been the victim of a sexual crime that they come forward to the police and make that complaint. And I would, and certainly my view, my expectation as First Minister would be that that would be taken deadly seriously by the police and investigated. Now, in relation to the question of trust about how these matters are handled, we've seen examples where there have been extensive prosecutions for sexual conduct and sexual misconduct in Scotland, sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. There have been a whole range of prosecutions taken forward successfully by the police, obviously taken forward by the Crown, which are determined to address the very serious issues that Mr Finlay puts to me. And I hope that gives victims of these crimes confidence that if they come forward, their concerns will be properly and fully investigated by Police Scotland, which would be my expectation as First Minister.
Russell Finlay.
I think that any attempt to shift the blame onto victims for how and when these are reported is highly questionable. Taylor was a child. These crimes were known about at the time by the authorities on the basis of the social work reports. And of course, grooming gangs are not confined to any one community. Earlier this year, a group of white men and women were jailed for the horrific abuse of children in Glasgow. Last month, a Romanian gang was convicted of abusing 10 young women in Dundee. This is not a historic problem. It is happening today. Reports of online child sexual abuse made to Police Scotland have more than doubled in the past year alone. So how can John Swinney hope to stop child abuse now, when he won't support a full and fearless investigation into the industrial-scale abuse of recent years?
First Minister.
The first thing I want to say is that nothing that I am saying is about shifting the blame. And I say that respectfully to Parliament, but I'm simply putting on the record factual information that's been provided to me by Police Scotland. Now, in relation to the question of... my parliamentary record demonstrates that I am prepared to ensure that significant efforts are made to address abusive conduct in our society. The Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry was sponsored under my leadership as Education Secretary and Deputy First Minister for many years, and it does vital work in making sure that the voices of victims are heard loud and clear in our society. Now, on the question of online child abuse, I was clear in an answer to Martin Whitfield last week in Parliament that I want to make sure every single step we can take as a government and our authorities in Scotland is directed towards tackling online child abuse. Indeed, the efforts that have been put in place by Police Scotland under the auspices of the Gartcosh Crime Campus are lauded around the world as an example of integrated proceedings involving multiple agencies to ensure that organised crime networks in Scotland are shattered as a consequence of our efforts. So I assure Mr Finlay of our determination to do all of that activity, but also to work collaboratively, as I said to Mr Whitfield last week, to ensure that there is a legislative approach in place in the United Kingdom, which is using the powers of the United Kingdom, which don't exist for this Parliament, to tackle the culture of online abuse, which is attacking the very fabric of childhood in Scotland today as a consequence of the lawlessness that has been perpetrated by online agencies.
Russell Finlay.
Talks about his parliamentary record. Well, that also shows that he voted against my party's attempts to instigate a grooming gang inquiry in Scotland just a matter of weeks ago. And in a previous answer, he cited the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, saying that they are looking at these issues. However, victims like Taylor are concerned because the same authorities who failed them sit on this government group, and they fear that it's little more than another SNP talking shop. In July, the group discussed Baroness Casey's report into grooming gangs elsewhere in the United Kingdom. And the minutes of this meeting state, and I quote, "There is no current evidence that the issues identified in Casey are presenting in the same way in Scotland." Now, in light of the available evidence, Presiding Officer, that claim is patently untrue. Does John Swinney agree that grooming gangs are a problem in Scotland and not just elsewhere?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Finlay is not setting out properly the effect of the amendment that his colleague Liam Kerr put forward during the course of the Victims and Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Bill, because all that amendment would have required was a Victims and Witnesses Commissioner, who has as yet not been appointed, to undertake a report which would consider whether or not there was any further action required in this respect. So this is not something that could happen today. It would have to wait for the Victims and Witnesses Commissioner to be appointed and for that individual to then consider whether there is any appropriate action. So it's just completely and utterly a distortion to say that there was a groomings inquiry proposal in front of Parliament that was not supported. Now, the reason why I cited the action that I cited at the beginning is that it's action that's happening today. The National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group are looking at these questions. Police Scotland is actively reviewing current and historical abuse investigations. So that is happening today in Scotland under the direction of this Scottish Government. We will consider its findings. I reiterate that we remain open to the question of an inquiry on grooming gangs, but what I am satisfied about is that the police will address these issues and that our judicial system will address them too, and we will reflect on whether there is any further scrutiny that's required in the light of those investigations.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Later today, we'll hear from the Health Secretary about the government's so-called NHS Winter Preparedness Plan. But we have these announcements every year, and the crisis continues. Take the example of delayed discharge. This time last year, I called for action over the almost 2,000 hospital beds a day that are being lost because patients couldn't be discharged. This year, that number is almost exactly the same. Last year, the Health Secretary admitted the crisis in our NHS isn't just for Christmas, it's all year round. So why are we facing another winter unprepared? Why has another year gone and the SNP have wasted it? Why do Scots continue to suffer because of John Swinney and his SNP government's incompetence?
First Minister.
President, so over the course of the last year, the Government has been focused on doing a number of things to reduce pressure in our NHS system. That's why we're now seeing long waits coming down. It's why we're seeing waiting lists coming down. Now, the issue that Mr Sarwar raises, of course, is about the flow of patients through our health and social care system. And I accept that the issue of flow through the system is the critical issue here. That's why every NHS board now has frailty services in A&E departments, which will help particularly with older and more vulnerable patients, where the average length of stay is being reduced as a consequence of the intervention of the frailty services. So that's one thing that's changed materially, along with the efforts to reduce pressure on the health service through the reduction in waiting lists, to ensure that we have the adequate measures in place. And of course, other interventions such as hospital at home and the support that's been put in place through the strong local government settlement that we gave this year to strengthen health and social care partnerships to make sure more and more people can be supported at home rather than in our hospitals.
Ms Sarwar.
The level of delayed discharge is almost exactly the same as last year, demonstrating no progress. Every year they have a new plan, and every year things get worse. Let's look at two other measures, A&E and cancelled operations. Last winter, over 90,000 patients waited over 4 hours in A&E. That's well over 4,000 higher than the winter before. But A&E performance leading into this winter is worse than last year. Let's look at operations. Last winter, almost 4,500 operations were cancelled. But in the months leading into winter this year, there have already been 8,640 cancelled operations. That's almost 600 more in the months leading into winter than last year. Every year the SNP has a new plan, and every year things get even worse. John Swinney was supposed to be the guy that steadied the ship and made things better. But it's obvious to everyone that he's failed, hasn't he?
First Minister.
I don't think this is a great week for Mr Sarwar to talk to me about steadying the ship when I look at the chaos of the Labour government in London. Let me reassure Mr Sarwar with the fact that in the last 12 months there has been an increase in the operations performed in Scotland, and in September of this year there was an even higher increase in the number of operations carried out. So the throughput, the activity levels in the health service are increasing, which is why we are making headway on reducing the waiting lists and the waiting times that people are experiencing. Now, of course, there are enormous pressures on A&E, and one of the issues, I was briefed about it on Tuesday by the Chief Medical Officer, is that the expectation is that the flu season will be particularly challenging for us this winter, which is to do with the prevailing strain of flu that is emerging. So there is going to be pressure on our emergency services, which are about the pressures that are coming because of wider health considerations. But what I can assure Mr Sarwar about is that the Government's efforts to, for example, increase the number of GPs so we've got more access to healthcare, expand the number of frailty units, to reduce the waiting lists and waiting times, are all focused on ensuring our health service can meet the needs of the people of Scotland.
Anna Sarwar.
Officer, the truth is that every part of our NHS is now at breaking point, and all because of this SNP government. Let's look at John Swinney's record. On his watch, the NHS is now in permanent crisis. Hundreds more operations cancelled this year than last year. Thousands more patients facing unacceptable A&E waits. Ambulances waiting hours outside of A&E. Thousands forced to remortgage homes or borrow from family to go private. Hundreds of thousands waiting in pain and anxiety on NHS waiting lists. Put simply, our NHS is not safe in John Swinney's hands. This isn't a winter crisis, it's an SNP crisis, and it's putting lives at risk. So doesn't this disastrous record show that we must make this winter the last that the SNP are in charge of our NHS?
First Minister.
As I set out to Parliament, a whole series of examples of progress have been made in the National Health Service, not least that new outpatient waits have fallen for 4 consecutive months, waits longer than a year. The total waiting list for outpatients and inpatients and day case lists have decreased. So progress has been made in that respect. Activity in the National Health Service has increased, with extra appointments being available in a whole range of different disciplines. Operation numbers are up. The improvements in relation to the record number of hip and knee operations have been delivered as a consequence of interventions that I have made. And in preparation for winter, we have frailty services in A&E departments, the length and breadth of the country, to make sure that the needs of people are being met. So I've focused, since I became First Minister, on ensuring that I strengthen the National Health Service to ensure it meets the needs of the people of Scotland. And I think if anybody is looking around just now, wondering what the prospect of a Labour government might be like in Scotland after the elections in May, they will see the very, very disappointing spectacle of the United Kingdom Labour government. Look at the behaviour and the performance of the UK government in the last 15 months. A cut to winter fuel payments. A cut to winter fuel payments for pensioners. No action on the 2-child limit, and the chaos of the last few days, where the Prime Minister's team are briefing against his Health Secretary, where the Labour Party are fighting amongst themselves. Well, what the people of Scotland can rely on is having a First Minister and me that fights for the people of Scotland. I'll leave the fighting amongst themselves to the Labour Party and their failed UK government.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I declare an interest in that my wife is a primary school teacher and a member of the EIS. Presiding Officer, when John Swinney was Education Secretary, the SNP made a manifesto commitment to cut teachers' class contact time. An hour and a half less each week in front of class, so more time to do lesson prep, to do marking, and all the other things that teaching involves. That is what the SNP promised they'd deliver. Now, nearly 5 years on, that's not happened, and teachers are so angry about it that they could strike by the end of January. So can I ask the First Minister, why has he not delivered on the SNP's manifesto commitment to our teachers?
First Minister.
This is an important issue, and I'm determined to make progress on it. When we negotiated our budget agreement with local authorities last year, one of the provisions in it was to make progress on exactly this issue. There were obviously a number of other commitments in the agreement that was reached with local authorities, a number of obligations on the government in relation to financial support for local authorities, in relation to there being no restrictions on the council tax, and a variety of other issues. Every single one of the commitments made by the government has been honoured and fulfilled, but we await progress with local authorities on class contact time. Now, I've made it very clear to the President of COSLA that I am not prepared to tolerate a situation where we move at the pace of the slowest local authority, which is what the government is being presented with just now. So I will have the opportunity to discuss this issue when I address the COSLA annual conference later on today in St Andrews. But it's an important issue on which I want to make progress, because I don't want to see education disrupted by industrial action, and I don't believe there's a need for that, because we could be making progress on this issue, because there are sufficient teachers in the system to reduce class contact time in the way that Mr Cole-Hamilton puts to me, but it needs progress from our local authority partners, and the government will be insisting upon that.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I have to say, Presiding Officer, I think it's a pretty pathetic excuse for the First Minister to pin this on councils when so many of those same councils are run by his party. Let's just get all that straight. So the SNP government is blaming SNP councils for stopping the SNP from keeping SNP election promises. With that kind of contortion, Presiding Officer, the First Minister must be attending some kind of secret yoga classes. Presiding Officer, teachers don't want to strike. They just want this government to keep its promises. Strike action a couple of years ago caused pupils to miss up to a dozen days of school. It caused havoc for working parents. So will the First Minister give families a cast-iron guarantee today that there will be no strikes in the new year?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Cole-Hamilton raises with me the logistics of how these changes are made. I cannot instruct Scottish councils to reduce class contact time. I need to do it by agreement, because the Education Scotland Act 1980 gives operational responsibility for the running of our schools to councils. Now, Mr Cole-Hamilton is at the front of the queue, normally demanding that I respect local authorities and local decision-making, and here I'm doing exactly that. But the point I'm simply making to Parliament is that the Government reached an agreement with local authorities about reducing class contact time. I've kept my side of the bargain. I want local authorities to keep their side of the bargain, which is about reducing class contact time, because I don't want there to be any disruption to education. We've just managed to negotiate a pay deal with teachers, which has been accepted by teachers, so there will be no disruption because of pay as a consequence of this negotiation by the Scottish Government and by local authorities. And I want to make progress on class contact time. And that's exactly what the Education Secretary and I are focused on doing.
Question number 4, Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the report on regional economic growth by former University of Glasgow Principal Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, all contributions by Professor Muscatelli are worthy of consideration, and the Scottish Government will do so. On the main topic of regional economic structures, we are already committed to increasing regional empowerment and will provide further information on our plans in the coming weeks. We also note that Professor Muscatelli identifies the requirement for a supportive immigration policy to contribute to economic growth and the need for the Scottish Government to influence the UK Government's broken system. We need an immigration system that supports Scotland's distinct demographic needs, and I would once again urge the United Kingdom Government to finally recognise that.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the First Minister for his answer. It was Anna Sarwar who said, "Read my lips, no austerity under a Labour government." Now his Westminster bosses threaten to inflict more than £1 billion of cuts to Scotland's budget. These cuts would fly in the face of the economic growth Scotland needs, as outlined by Professor Muscatelli's report. Does the First Minister share my view that this threat proves beyond doubt that decisions on Scotland's finances should be made here in Scotland with a fresh start of independence, and not by a Westminster government that fails Scotland at every turn?
First Minister.
Well, Presiding Officer, I agree with Mr Stewart on some of these fundamental points, and many of these points were made by the credit rating agencies, who indicated that we have in this country a strong economy, we have prudent financial policies, budgetary planning with the ability to adjust where necessary in a timely manner, and the fact that our economy is strong with high GDP per capita in an international comparison. That demonstrates that where we are able to exercise self-government, it is successful for Scotland. I want us to be able to exercise more self-government with independence and to pursue the economic opportunities that would bright for an independent Scotland.
Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Sir Anton Muscatelli's report is damning on the impact of SNP tax rises, so perhaps Anna Sarwar can pass it to Rachel Reeves before she inflicts yet more damage on the Scottish economy. But will the First Minister now stop playing the daft laddie on income tax and concede 2 points? One is that he has broken his manifesto pledge not to freeze income tax. And when we also concede this, that he has repeatedly misled this Parliament, as have his ministers, on how many Scots are now paying more tax than they would if they lived in England.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, we've maintained our manifesto commitments in relation to taxation and on the issues of the tax paid by people in Scotland. The Scottish Fiscal Commission's briefing paper on Tuesday indicated quite clearly that the majority of taxpayers in Scotland are paying less in taxation than if they lived in the rest of the United Kingdom. And that's what I've always said to Parliament, and I'll keep on saying it. Mr Hoy might not like it, but I'm going to keep on saying the things that are the case.
Let's ensure that everyone gathered here can hear what is being said. Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I welcome the interest in this important report from Scotland's leading economist, Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli, commissioned by Scottish Labour. But perhaps let's try a supplementary action on the detail of the report, because it comes out the same week as an Audit Scotland report identifies that the Scottish Government has £1.1 billion less to spend because earnings are growing less quickly in Scotland as they are in the rest of the United Kingdom. So does he agree with the two observations from both this report and Audit Scotland's, that there's been a failure to identify the substantial economic levers available to the Scottish Government and marshal them, and in particular the detail of the Audit Scotland report, that there's been a failure to focus on policies that could grow earnings and wages in Scotland? Because after all, that's not just right for the Scottish economy, that's right for Scottish workers, isn't it?
First Minister.
Well, what I would say to Daniel Johnson, a number of points in what he said to me. In relation to the question of wealth generation, since 2007, under this government, GDP per person in Scotland has grown by 10.2% compared to 6.8% in the United Kingdom, while productivity has grown at an average rate of 0.9% per year compared to the UK average of 0.3%. So that debunks the point that Mr Johnson is putting to me. Of course, there are structural inequalities in the United Kingdom in terms of economic activity and wealth, which the Scottish Government is trying to counter with the limited powers of devolution. We could do more with the powers of independence that would give us more scope to act in this respect. But I think what should be causing much more cheer and optimism in Parliament today is the report of the credit rating agencies, which demonstrates that Scotland has got a large and well-diversified economy that supports tax generation capacity, that we have governance has a positive impact on the rating, stemming from good budgeting practices, a supportive institutional framework and a good fiscal track record. It's pretty obvious that the opposition in this Parliament cannot cope when there's anything good said about Scotland or good said about the performance of the Scottish Government. This is a day for Scotland to be proud of our economic track record.
Question number 5, Rachel Hamilton.
To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government will maintain its manifesto commitment to freeze income tax rates and bans.
First Minister.
President Officer, we will, as in the normal course for any budget, outline our income tax policy for 2026-27 in the Scottish Budget on the 13th of January 2026.
Rachel Hamilton.
I have it here, Presiding Officer: freeze income tax rates and bans and increase thresholds by a maximum of inflation. It says it in their manifesto. But Labour is set to do exactly what John Swinney wants. Rachel Reeves will break her manifesto commitment and raise taxes for hard-working Scots. They will face a £1 billion shortfall, as according to Audit Scotland. John Swinney seems set on breaking his promises too. Can he tell us how much it's going to cost Scottish taxpayers?
First Minister.
Obviously, there's a lot of talk about tax going on just now, and a lot of uncertainty about the United Kingdom Government's position, which may well have implications for us. So the Scottish Government will take its opportunity to consider those issues and set out in an orderly fashion the approach that we're going to take on tax, given the fact that we will have we may well have a different tax landscape to consider, and that's what people in Scotland would expect us to do.
Question number 6, Ariane Burgess.
To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government is still on track to restore 250,000 hectares of peatland by 2030.
First Minister.
Through our peatland restoration programme, Peatland Action, we've restored around 90,000 hectares to date, including 14,860 hectares in 24-25, and this year we're on track to deliver more than 12,000 hectares. In the draft climate change plan published last week, we included a proposal to expand and extend our programme to restore 400,000 hectares by 2040, reflecting an increase in our ambition. Protecting, managing and restoring degraded peatlands is a vital part of mitigating and adapting to the climate and nature emergencies.
Ariane Burgess.
80% of our peatlands, approximately 1.6 million hectares, are degraded. And this means they're one of our largest single sources of emissions, They can't support nature restoration and nor provide solutions to issues like flooding. It's vital that we urgently step up restoration efforts, and yet in the new draft climate change plan, this government is slowing things down. Increasing restoration by 10% a year is a major deceleration compared to the previous 2030 target. First Minister, why is your government going backwards on this key policy at the same time as pledging to do more for climate and nature?
Through the Chair, always. First Minister.
As I set out in my earlier answer, we are taking a number of steps to extend the commitments on peatland restoration. This is one part of the programme for climate action which has been set out to Parliament, and by the end of this year we will have set out the planning necessary to achieve the 2040 ambitions. I agree with Ariane Burgess about the importance of taking this action to help us in our journey to net zero, and that's exactly the focus of the Government's climate change plan.
Brief supplementary, Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, in Midlothian, peat is still being extracted. It's dug up commercially with a licence under the Town and Country Planning Act 1997. And that only requires a 15-year periodic review of those licences for mineral permissions. Can I ask, and this is something I've pursued for some time, given it seems bizarre, even counterproductive, while pledging to restore peat, that legislation still allows peat extraction over 15-year periods? And can I ask once again if the Scottish Government will undertake to review that legislation?
First Minister.
So, I hope this gives some reassurance to Christine Graham, but in National Planning Framework 4, there is provision that development proposals for new commercial peat extraction, including extensions to existing sites, are not supported except for use in the whisky industry. So we continue to work towards delivering our commitment to ban the sale of horticultural peat and are currently exploring all legislative options for establishing new restrictions. I hope that gives Christine Graham some reassurance, but I'd be happy to engage further on that question.
Brief supplementary, Fergus Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last year, the 14,860 hectares of peatland accounted for a reduction in carbon emissions of 282,000 tonnes approximately. But the wildfire, the single wildfire at Dava Bridge in July this year accounted for an initial estimate of 590,000 tonnes, more than twice as much as the total from peatland restoration. So, given the aim here is the overall reduction of carbon emissions, Presiding Officer, wouldn't true Greens, like myself, wish to see a little more money spent on tackling wildfires effectively, and perhaps the money could come from the peatland restoration budget?
First Minister.
I don't think there's a sort of an either-or question here that Mr Ewing puts to me, because I don't want to see wildfires happening in Scotland. They are happening because of climate change. So we've got to take action to the long-term action that is required to achieve climate change, to achieve climate action, to reduce the temperature of the planet. Now, as Parliament knows, I've been in Malawi and Zambia. I've seen at absolutely close quarters the ferocious damage of climate change in these communities, and it's happening here in Scotland. The wildfires are a symptom of this problem. We've had water scarcity problems in Scotland right up until early October in the northeast of Scotland. So we cannot ignore the effects of climate change in our society. We have to take the action, which is why the Government is committed to peatland restoration, and it's why the Government is committed, as Mr Fairley set out in a statement to Parliament, to taking effective collaborative work to tackle the risk of wildfires in our society.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries. Much interest as ever. Concise questions and responses appreciated. I call Bob Doris.
Presiding Officer, my constituent Chelsea was diagnosed with MND in 2024, and with her condition now worryingly deteriorating, finds herself in wholly unsuitable accommodation with her husband, who is her full-time carer, and her 4 children. A larger, appropriately adapted property would afford Chelsea and her family a quality of life for the precious time they have remaining together. Despite the best efforts of MND Scotland and representations I have made to various housing providers, the size of the property required has been a stumbling block. The First Minister, I know a new property for Chelsea and her family is not in your gift. However, in such circumstances, families quite rightly look to all of us for a solution. Can I ask if the First Minister will consider the plight of Chelsea and her family and use his office to see if a solution can be identified to this dreadful situation?
First Minister.
I'm very sorry to hear of the case that Mr Doris brings to my attention on behalf of his constituent Chelsea, and I send Chelsea and her family my very best wishes. One of the important issues here is about the ability to adapt properties to meet the needs of individuals, or potentially to have new build properties constructed, and that can't be done overnight. We have increased the budget for adaptations to £20.9 million, and it was one of the reasons for that was to make sure we had suitable accommodation for cases such as Chelsea's. And if Mr Doris would like to share details with me, I will use whatever endeavours I can in my office to try to resolve the situation. While I'm speaking about M&D issues, may I also pay tribute to Sheriff Alistair Carmichael, who is very courageously a sheriff in Dundee, who is continuing to work as a sheriff with adaptive technology and has shared his case publicly with us all. And I wish to express my admiration to Sheriff Carmichael for the courageous example he sets to us all in the face of the challenges that he is experiencing. He is an example to us all, and I know that Chelsea and her family will be as well.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, the UK Supreme Court issued a judgment in the cases of David Daly and Andrew Keir, which, whilst upholding their convictions, raises very serious issues about the conduct of trials involving sexual offences. Legal experts say this could trigger multiple appeals by those convicted of sexual offences. The courts have a very difficult task of balancing the need to protect complainants, usually women, from intrusive questioning around behaviour, whilst also guaranteeing the accused a fair trial. So how will the Scottish Government respond to this judgment?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the judgment from the Supreme Court gives detailed consideration to the complex issues that are involved in the admissibility of evidence in sexual offences trials. It is clear from the judgment that there is no requirement for a change in the law regulating these matters, which is specifically provided for in sections 274 and 275 of the Criminal Procedure Scotland Act 1995. What the Supreme Court did say was that it is for all judges in sexual offences cases to reflect this ruling as they would in any other Supreme Court ruling that was relevant to them in the handling of such cases. So this is therefore a matter for the courts, which, as Mr Fraser will know, operate independently of the government, and I know that the judiciary will be considering the issues that arise as a consequence of the Supreme Court judgment, but there is no requirement for us to change the law in these matters.
Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In addition to the question from Murdo Fraser, the Parliament has recently passed the Victims and Witnesses Act that is looking to make the experience easier for victims and witnesses. So I would ask the First Minister what assurances he can give to women who are now concerned about the risk of appeals and having to go through that process, and what this means, the decision from the Supreme Court, in terms of future evidence in rape and sexual assault cases.
First Minister.
In relation to the point that I've made, the substantive point is that there is, in my view, no requirement for there to be a legislative change. This is about court procedures, but Claire Baker's question highlights the important issues in relation to conduct of cases in court, which can have a bearing on the type of questions that are led and the type of evidence that is led, and that can cause enormous distress to victims, who are invariably women in these cases. The Government will consider carefully the implications of the ruling. These will be considered by the Government in the ordinary course of time, but obviously the courts will have to reflect on these issues. But I think it would be deeply regrettable if there was any situation where we have a return to some of the practices in courts that have been deeply distressing to victims of sexual crime. And I want to make sure, and I want to set out today my desire to make sure that that is not the outcome that arises out of the Supreme Court judgment.
Emma Roddick.
New modelling by this SNP government shows that a social tariff on energy bills could lift more than 200,000 Scottish households out of extreme fuel poverty. While the powers to compel energy companies to act remain at Westminster, the Scottish Government must do all that it can to encourage progress, especially as the UK Government has broken its promise to reduce bills by £300. Can the First Minister outline how much households could expect to save under a social tariff, and can he outline what engagement his government is undertaking to make a social tariff a reality for those who need it most, like those in the Highlands and Islands?
First Minister.
So we shared the final report of our social tariff working group with the UK Government in March this year, asking it to act on the recommendations. Our analysis this week shows that if implemented, around 660,000 households in Scotland would see their model bills go down by up to an average of £700 under a targeted bill discount, lifting more than 150,000 households out of fuel poverty. We continue to seek engagement with the UK Government on this work, and our position remains that they must take urgent action to protect households and deliver on its promises, which it has singularly failed to do to date.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Keith Rawlinson died in February 2024 after being brutally attacked while working as a bus driver in Elgin. His killer only received a sentence of 4 years and 4 months, but now his family have been told through the Victim Notification Scheme he could be released as early as next year. Keith's widow has called this disgusting, and Sue Rawlinson has said she feels heartbroken to think that Keith has not had justice, and she also said, "I don't think he should be released early. We've been totally let down." First Minister, Sue Rawlinson's right, isn't she?
First Minister.
I have every sympathy with Mrs Rawlinson in the loss that she has suffered, and I pay tribute to her husband, who should not have experienced what he experienced in the course of his responsibilities. The issues of sentencing, of course, are taken forward independently by the judiciary, and it would be inappropriate for me to question sentences that are set out. And, of course, there are various legislative issues that have to be considered before anyone is released, and those will take their course. But I take this opportunity to express my sympathy to Mrs Rawlinson on the heartbreak that she suffered with the loss of her husband and the anxiety that this issue will be causing to her today.
Rhoda Grant.
Ferry passengers in Lewis have been experiencing incredible disruption due to the MV Isle of Lewis being unable to carry vehicles since last week. This has been particularly difficult and trying for those travelling to hospital and from hospital appointments. It adds over 3 hours' drive to their journey if they can get an alternative booking. All road haulage is also disrupted, and it feels like it's the start of another winter of constant disruption with no end in sight. So can I ask the First Minister what alternatives have been put in place for Lewis? What alternatives will be put in place for Barra when that ferry returns to its normal route at some point, possibly next week? And what steps is he going to take to ensure that islanders are never left in this situation again?
First Minister.
I understand the difficulties that have been experienced. I understand that cars are now able to be taken on the MV Isle of Lewis, which is the ferry operating on the Ullapool to Stornoway route. In addition to that, CalMac have put on additional sailings of the MV Hebrides between Uig and Tarbert, which I accept puts on a longer journey for travellers from Lewis, but it has provided additional capacity on that route. And, of course, as we go through the winter maintenance period, we're operating to a winter timetable where there are fewer sailings. But CalMac will be working, and the Transport Secretary is deeply engaged in all these questions to make sure there is effective and sustainable services available to all island communities. And the Government will be actively working to ensure that's the case.
Take 2 further brief supplementaries. Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week saw another example of SNP Scotland and Labour UK being on different trajectories. While unemployment in Scotland continues to fall, in the rest of Britain it's risen to its highest level since the pandemic. And this morning we saw UK growth last quarter at a pitiful 0.1%. Can the First Minister outline the SNP Government's commitment to growing Scotland's economy and supporting people into work, particularly our younger generation?
First Minister.
So that is a key focus of my government, which is to improve economic opportunity. We are now seeing very distinct patterns on unemployment between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. We continue to have substantial success in growing the economy and the attraction of investment. And of course, the credit rating score, which we achieved last night from Moody's and Standard & Poor's, the best rating we could possibly have achieved, a tribute to the strength of the Scottish economy, the strength of the fiscal management of this government, the strength of the institutions that we have at our disposal, is good news for Scotland, and it's a proud day for our country.
Absolutely. And Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 10 years on from Bailey Gwyn's tragic killing in Aberdeen and promises of action from this government, hard-hitting figures show that incidents of pupil violence in Aberdeen schools have quadrupled, whilst across the city the number of crimes recorded within schools is rising year on year. But let members be in no doubt, this is not confined to Aberdeen. For years, this government has promised but failed to stem the violence in our schools. So when will this government start taking real action, such as anti-weapon lessons in classrooms? And finally, stop these horrific incidents?
First Minister.
Well, let me make it clear there is absolutely no place for violence in our schools in any way, shape or form, and the Government's behaviour guidance, which has been constructed in collaboration with local authorities and trade unions, is designed to enable us to address these issues. Many of the techniques that Mr Kerr has talked about education, about violence and the danger of carrying knives, for example, are taken forward in our school system. The Mentors in Violence Reduction Programme, the steps that are taken in relation to the No Knives Better Lives campaign are all shared in our schools, and I want to reinforce the importance the Government attaches to the education on measures of this type to ensure that pupil behaviour does not result in the tragedies like the loss of Bailey Gwyn, which is at the heart of Mr Kerr's question.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. Point of order, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I fear that the First Minister may have misled Parliament again today, so I seek your advice on how we can invite the First Minister to correct the record. The SNP manifesto quite clearly committed to freezing income tax rates and bans, but yet in the budget of 2023-2024, both income tax rates and income tax bans rose above inflation. So the First Minister has yet again misled not just this Parliament, but the public who are watching. Can I seek your advice as to how we finally get the truth from the First Minister when he appears in this Parliament?
Thank you, Mr Hoy. Mr Hoy will be aware that the content of members' contributions is not a matter for the Chair. There is, of course, a mechanism that all members will be well aware of at this stage in the session, whereby any inaccuracies or otherwise can be corrected. We will now move on. Well, actually, we will have a suspension briefly to allow those leaving the chamber in the public gallery to do so before we move to the next item of business, which is members' business in the name of Sarah Boyack.
Could I ask our visitors in the gallery, who of course are most welcome to our Parliament, to Thank you. And the next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 19389 in the name of Sarah Boyack on supporting Tourette Scotland and greater awareness and inclusion for people with Tourette syndrome. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Sarah Boyack to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I do feel privileged to open this debate on a condition that affects so many across our communities. And it's difficult for us to imagine what it is like for your body to act without your say-so, for words to leave your lips you didn't intend to say. But for tens of thousands of Scots, this is their daily reality. And although it's estimated that 1 in 100 Scots may have Tourette syndrome, for too long it's been an undiscussed and under-resourced condition. An example of these barriers is clear in the case of my constituent Finn. He was prescribed comprehensive behavioural intervention for tics therapy to help with his Tourette's, only to discover no one in North Edinburgh was trained in how to do it. And it got worse. When upon inquiring if he could receive the treatment anywhere else in Scotland or Edinburgh, he was told no. It surely cannot be, in a country as well-resourced as ours, that patients are still unable to receive the treatment they are recommended by CAMHS. And far too many facing Tourette's go through the process of diagnosis only to find support on the other side lacking. And that's as equally true for their families. It's hard for parents to know when their child is at an early stage whether they are suffering from Tourette's and how to cope with a child who's not fully in control of what they say or what their body does. And far too many parents feel helpless in trying to balance all the life changes required with a Tourette's diagnosis. Often one parent has to give up work to look after their child with Tourette's due to disruptions at school, leaving a family with less income and stalled careers. Of course, wonderful organisations like Tourette Scotland provide a range of services and support to parents and to those with Tourette's. My constituent Tyler would not be where he is today without the support of Tourette Scotland. He was noticed by someone in his second year at school that was running the First Chances project. She helped Tyler find a goal and show to him that he's also able to achieve the things others can. And with the right support, Tyler was able to thrive, first at college, then at uni, where he graduated with a joint degree. And that was only thanks to the amazing support and grant funding to help manage his Tourette's. And this summer, Tyler went to the USA to take part in Camp America for 3 months, helping to support kids with disabilities and support as a camp counsellor. And Tyler's story should stand as an example of how Tourette's does not have to be a barrier to life. With the right support, those with a condition can achieve great things. But it shouldn't just be the role of third sector organisations or the NHS to provide this support. We need to foster an environment that allows those with Tourette's to thrive wherever they are in life. So I'm pleased that my office has already been in touch with the Scottish Parliament Engagement Office to introduce them to Tourette Scotland in a bid to make our Parliament a more Tourette's-friendly environment. Because in many environments, Tourette's can still be a challenging hurdle to overcome. A constituent of mine, Alan, shared with me the experience of his son, Frankie. He had first-hand the misunderstandings that Tourette's can bring in education. He was often punished for things out with his control due to no one recognising his condition. And it's hard to state how disruptive this can be for a child's education and their confidence in managing Tourette's. It's a major impact on a child's mental health due to the punishments they receive for their uncontrollable actions or the humiliation they are subjected to for a lack of understanding. And even when a diagnosis is made, often schools are ill-equipped to deal with it effectively due to a lack of training and resource. But it doesn't have to be this way. When I spoke to Alan about his son, he told me the practical steps that he believes are vital for ensuring that those with Tourette's receive necessary support. Clear, nice and sign guidance for Tourette's diagnosis. a national training programme for schools so that school staff and teachers are properly equipped to support those suffering from Tourette's, and early recognition and intervention in schools for students so that we can support kids up from an early age to ensure positive outcomes despite their condition. These are not fairy tale policies, they're achievable. We just need the political will to achieve them. And I'm glad that we're joined by constituents who have Tourette's in the public gallery today. Every single one of them will have had to overcome challenges related to their condition. And it's vital that we use this momentum to deliver lasting change so that for future generations, a Tourette's diagnosis does not need to carry the burden it once did. Last week, colleagues, I went to see the wonderful film I Swear, illustrating across the world the challenges of living with Tourette's. It's emotional, inspiring. It gives everyone an insight into the challenge people with Tourette's face. I think everyone should go and see it because it's a call for action. No child should see their educational attainment crumble in front of them because of a condition they can't control. No parent should have to give up work because the education system is unable to deal with their child's Tourette's. No patient should have to go through the ordeal of diagnosis just to find treatments thin on the ground or non-existent